So welcome to this ESOT Congress 2023 special evening event on xenotransplantation, navigating ethical frontiers and societal impacts. We're here not to discuss the science. We're here to discuss what are the questions that need to be asked around this exciting technique to deal with the desperate shortage of organs that we have globally. But of course, while we find it exciting, there are many people who find it a little unsettling, maybe a little bit concerning. Some may call it controversial. But the time to talk about this and have the debate is now. We heard in our plenary today that actually xenotransplantation may be happening in the clinic as early as 2024. That's next year. And I was struck this afternoon when I heard Jayme Locke talk about how confidently she said, when this goes into patients, when you do this, your patients will need to be hydrated. Look out for that. And it was really fascinating to me that she was talking about these practical elements that clinicians, surgeons, and physicians will have to be thinking about. But is society ready for this? Do they need to catch up? That's what we're going to be talking about tonight. And we're going to delve into that with the most fantastic panel, two of whom were on our plenary earlier on. Of course, Jayme Locke, as I mentioned, eminent transplant surgeon and a senior researcher at the University of Alabama at Birmingham in the US. She's professor of surgery and director of UAB's Comprehensive Transplant Institute. And she made headlines just days ago with the pig kidney transplant to a deceased donor, which made urine and cleared toxins for 7 days. So congratulations on that, Jayme. Amazing work. And it's what more can come. Also joined from our plenary, Eckhard, world-leading researcher, focusing on the development and characterization of tailored animal models. He's currently a professor of animal genetics and biotechnology at the University of Munich, LMU. So welcome to you. Now, we didn't want to have this event without ethics involved, of course. Matthias Kaiser was Professor Emeritus at the University of Bergen, a specialist in scientific ethics, particularly related to policy. So welcome to you from Norway. Also, Penilla Gunther, who you will know, who has been involved with ESOT for a couple of years now, former politician, Swedish MP previously, patient health advocate, and I'm really, really pleased you're on the panel as a former heart transplant recipient. So welcome, Penilla. And we have Efstratios Chatzixiros, advisor on transplantation, organs, tissues and cells at the World Health Organization in Geneva, who's going to give us the global perspective. He formerly was the National Donor Transplant Coordinator in Greece and has a background as a specialist nurse. So, without further ado, let's get on with these important questions. And first I want to ask Eckhard, how do we get this from the lab to the hospital? What are the steps that are needed? Am I right in saying the time to debate this is now?
Well, in our study, basically, we are in the process of finalizing the founder animals for our breeding colony. We still have then to do a few tests in non-human primates, and we'll do this in a specific way with animals that do not have exactly the same genetic modifications that will go into humans, because we know that in non-human primates, some of these modifications are toxic. And once we have the results, we will apply for a clinical pilot study with 4 to 6 patients. And the IMPD, the process for this is already ongoing. We do this in a rolling procedure. So we try to finalize the different packages, how we characterize the animals, how we design the preclinical study, how we design the clinical study.
So you sound very confident that these steps are going to be relatively straightforward.
I believe they are straightforward, and we are already in contact with the regulatory authority, which in Germany is the Paul-Ehrlich Institute, the German representative of EMA, and in this close contact we are developing the right strategy.
Jayme, is it the same in the US? I mean, I understand that Germany is pretty forward-thinking in Europe, and there's differences between other countries in Europe, but what about the US?
I mean, I think many of us have begun entering conversations with the Food and Drug Administration in the U.S. To move it into a phase 1 clinical trial in living persons, we have to have something called an IND, which is an investigational new drug product. We have several applications that are in the FDA and ongoing conversations. It's a little bit different in that the pig that we have studied in non-human primates has to be the one that we then move into living people. There's not going to be an allowance to have one that's ideal for a non-human primate and then into people. So it's a little bit different in that regard, but still quite hopeful. I think those conversations have gone quite well, and I think as Dr. Ayares mentioned in his talk, we're hopeful for 2024.
So warm conversations with the FDA, would you position it as?
What's that?
Warm conversations with the FDA.
I think the FDA really wants to try to figure out how to get to yes, but I think they are in a position where they're trying to balance the benefit to the individual who needs the transplant with any potential risks to society. And I think they're going about it in the right way. And I would say it's warm, but measured appropriately so.
I'll come back to that, but I just want to bring Penilla in. Penilla, you're from Sweden, and I think you think there's a different perspective in terms of how society and how regulators, how responsive they are going to be in the same way, and maybe it's not such a rosy picture.
No, I think it has been a non-question, really. Not anything that should, but have been any issue, really, to discuss. And we had a report from the Council of Medical Ethics in Sweden just December last year, and they said, okay, it's good to see what research will get us in this area, but nothing is really going on in Sweden, and it's more or less thinking of, let's look how others are doing, how's it moving forward. But not for us so far, no.
Matthias, you're from Norway. What is the appetite there?
I think it's very similar to Sweden. Norway is a very small country. We don't have any research on xenotransplantation going on. And also the government in general is very much in favor of a precautionary policy. And so actually xenotransplantation is forbidden by law still. It was revised in 2017 and 18. But in general, I think Norway tends to follow recommendations, particularly from the Council of Europe on these things. It has done earlier. And the report where I was a part from 2002, I think it was, on xenotransplantation, advised for a precautionary policy and, having the adequate regulations covering that. But also it called for more public involvement.
Eckhard, I'll bring you in just in a minute, but Eckhard, hearing that, there's such divergences in Europe, the Council of Europe saying precautionary principle, does that not give you some hesitation?
I think xenotransplantation has to be started locally with small clinical pilot studies, and it's clear that the attitude of different countries is different, even within Europe and also over the different continents. And I think just some countries have to start, and when it's obvious that xenotransplantation works, then others will follow.
Stratos, let's bring in the world perspective. This is a Northern Hemisphere thing we're discussing. But you're saying even some Northern European countries are not getting involved in it. So what's this with a wider global perspective? How does that fit in?
Well, first of all, let me say that it's not a new thing. We started already by 2004, where the World Health Assembly was concerned at the time, had the similar concerns, and we published a resolution which addressed the issues, and setting the ground at the time when the research was still developing, and therefore putting in some of the basic elements that regulatory framework should develop just to brace before the thing comes out. Although it's 20 years before, and there was a round of consultations with member states, with experts, and there was a growing attitude and appetite for that. But then a lot of things have changed during that time. So indeed, we have to take into consideration, as you said, you have a more developed regions, countries, high-income countries, but then also there are cultural, religious aspects in other parts of the world that might be inhibiting the globalization of that treatment. And indeed, we have to also consider the fact that there are resource limitations in most of the countries in those other areas that will inhibit perhaps the development of the technology. And that might create inequalities. It will create different forms of perhaps tourism, as we see now from the more developed going to the other areas, and it will be the other way around. People coming in need for that new treatment. So these are all things that we need to reconsider now as we engage into, as you said, 2000 just around the corner, and we really need to look into what the whole world is thinking about it, and how we can move together as one.
And I think that obviously being in a congress like ESOT, which is very exciting and presenting the science, there's maybe an understanding that everyone must think in the same way. But I think you went to one country in particular recently, and tell me about the response you got when you were having a debate on this.
It was an Islamic country, and we were addressing the issue to the Ministry of Health about all the policies that need to be developed. They were eager to embrace disease donation, which is also a controversial issue about brain death and everything. And when I mentioned the alternatives that in the near future, there was a shock about the use of pigs. As you know, in a lot of, some of the big religions, that there are these issues. And of course, they said it's a no-no for them. So who are we developing it for?
I think you said to me that the room went absolutely silent when you mentioned it. Yeah. Let me come on to Matthias. We've mentioned some of the challenges and barriers to this, religion being one. What are the other main ones that you see as preventing the development of xeno in the clinic?
Well, I mean, first of all, I must say, being here, I get so impressed by the scientific advances that Eckhard and Jayme have been presenting from the last time I have been involved in that. It is really an enormous scientific advantage. However, I think the big challenge is to reach out to a wider society and gain the trust of them. Most of you are seen as narrow-minded experts, and the public has not really always trusted those experts. We have seen this, and we still see this, for example, in the aftermath or during the COVID pandemic, that scientific experts are perceived to pursue their own interests, but not necessarily the interests of society. So the big challenge that I see is really to reach out and get the public engaged in discussions. And I don't care about the surveys. These are just, pictures of a moment attitude. But really deliberation with specific groups, be it focus groups, be it lay people, consensus conferences, or others, that impact back on the wider society, civil society. I think that is needed for an acceptance, also from the political side. Yeah. I know in Norway, this is a highly important point. You cannot do regulation, without have the feeling that you have the public with you. So I think a lot of the scientists here have to go out and actually explain why what they do is important and why it is safe, or why they think it is safe, at least, and get others engaged.
I'll let the scientists come and defend themselves in a minute to that point, and how they may be already doing that. But I want to bring in Penilla, because you mentioned the political side, Matthias. As a former MP, what would you say? Is there some reactionary politicians who would find this difficult to stomach, and they may have their own personal views, but what is your input?
Well, I think, we have recently changed legislation about a lot of things to promote, organ donation, and also the legislation about DCD, for example, and it was quite a discussion about that, also. So, and I think, everybody is also talking about life science, and we have seen a lot of companies, here, And we know that many people are working with solutions, artificial hearts and artificial lungs and so on, and a lot of things. So why should you really promote some controversial research? At least in many people's minds, I think so. And the politicians are dependent on their voters, of course, the citizens.
Let me ask you a personal question. I hope you don't mind me asking this publicly, Penilla. Obviously, you had a heart transplant some years ago, and luckily for you, you were a recipient in a very quick time. But if you had been on a waiting list for a long time and there wasn't a human heart, would you have considered an animal donation?
No, personally, I would not have done that. And that's more because I haven't seen any good results. I haven't seen anyone who have survived so far from these tests made. And I think that's also something that Matthias said. It's about trust, Okay. And as a patient, you can be very desperate, of course, for having a new organ. And you can be willing to take anything just to be able to live. Yeah. But I think it's a question of trust and time here to see where it goes. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I know that Matthias wanted to come in, but I'm very clear that you guys have the right to reply on this. Lack of trust, seeming experimental. Where do you see these, Jayme, in terms of mitigating these kind of views that you're hearing from the other side of the floor?
Well, first, I think they're incredibly important, and I really appreciate you speaking up and saying that. I think that's it takes a lot of courage to actually do that, particularly on this stage. I do want to address the who are we doing this for. So I think it's really important, at least the model that we're working with. If you look, only about a third of individuals on our waiting list actually have a negative cross-match. So the existing genetically edited animals that we're working with are not going to universally solve the organ shortage. They are going to complement the allo transplant process. So I think it's okay that not everybody would be interested or want to take this because if they don't and there are others who do, that frees up a human organ then. And so really the goal would be to combine those two things. I think, to be honest, I'm doing this for the patients. I think, every day I see patients in clinic every single week that I add to our waiting list. And I know they're more likely to die than they are to get an organ offer if they don't have a living donor in the context of kidney transplantation. And that's really the drive. We have spent a lot of time, I don't know how familiar everyone here is. Obviously, in the United States, we've had many health disparities and health inequities. In the state of Alabama, in particular, there are trust issues. You may or may not be familiar with something called the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. And that's from many, many years ago, but it impacted our local African-American community very significantly and really built up mistrust in our medical community. And we have been, that's a big deal, and we, to this day, continue to work. And so from our perspective, we've been really working collaboratively with our local community, as well as our historically Black universities, to engage our local community and get a sense of what people want, what they need, what they want to be a part of. And I think more than anything, what patients want and what their families want and their community wants in terms of what they're saying to us is they want information. They want us to be as honest about what we know as we are as honest about what we don't know. And I think that's something that we have to really do a good job of, because the first people that this goes into, they are going to be true pioneers. There is far more that we do not know than what we do know. But what I can say is that we don't have enough organs to go around. I think xenotransplantation is one small piece of solving that shortage. Bioartificial organs are important. Kidney pumps, everything you can think of is going to be important. We don't have the ultimate fix yet, but we need to keep going because every day people are dying. And when you ask the patients, most of them say they just want a chance. And I think this gives us the opportunity to give them a chance. But of course, it's their personal decision.
Also, you've got your own patients on a waiting list. You also are often in the media, so people know who you are. How often are people contacting you to find out about your work and potentially find out if they can be the first?
When there are recent events that come out, it's a lot. Outside of that, it's usually at least once a week. We get an email or some form of contact where they are literally, quite literally, in an email sharing their personal journey of where they are. Often it's a family member writing on their behalf, right, fearful of losing their loved one, begging to participate in any trial, and just to have the opportunity. And so I think this is going to be important for a segment of our population. And the recent headlines about the work you did with the kidney, how many did you get in that flurry? Gosh, I quit counting. I'm not sure. I could ask our coordinator. It was a lot. Let me bring Eckhard in. Obviously, some quite strong words there from Matthias about people not trusting, thinking you're doing it for the science. Yeah. This has been a lifelong passion for you, and you've put many, many hours.
Well, I believe trust is being built by good and solid data. Yeah? That this is what we need. I think the attitude towards xenotransplantation is influenced by two different things. The one is the level of information about xenotransplantation. For instance, many people think that the donor animals are suffering, but they are not. Yeah? A vet could not distinguish whether this is a genetically modified pig or it's just a normal pig. And the other important point is whether you need an organ replacement or not, and whether you have a chance to get a human organ or not. In our consortium, we have one project specifically dealing with all these societal aspects. And what they did was a real research project. They organized a citizens conference. They randomly selected 50 citizens from Munich, reflecting the complete diversity of the population. And then they asked them at the beginning whether they are positive or negative against xenotransplantation. Everybody was negative. Yeah? And then they had, over 4 weekends, information courses, not indoctrination, but just information about the donor animals, about the patients, and so on. And in the end, almost all were positive, depending on two different arguments. The one is a real informed consent. A patient must know what are the risks and potential benefits. And the other thing was that proper regulation, legislation is in place. And this is pretty much what the WHO published in this Shanghai communique. If I'm allowed, I would like to make one comment on the acceptance of xenotransplantation by the Islamic religion. I don't think this is true, this statement, that there is a negative attitude. We had another research project that dealt specifically with the religious aspects, and they discussed with Christian, with Jewish and Islamic religion, and in any case, it was completely acceptable because the highest goal of Islam is to save lives. They are not allowed to eat pork, but they would be very much allowed to transplant a pig organ if it saves the life of a patient.
Thank you, Eckhard. You wanted to come in, Matthias, earlier on. Is it something related to what's been said?
Yes, it is very much related. And first of all, I mean, congratulations to your activity in Munich. I think this is basically the right way to go, right? What I would like to add here, and Jayme has been mentioning that the importance of being open about what I call the known unknowns, the uncertainty that we are facing. Part of that uncertainty, and part of that is the risk, where it's different from normal allo transplantation, right? In allotransplantation, we are concerned with the risk to the patient, survival days and all of that. But here there is at least a minute chance of xenosis, right, that we cannot really exclude because it's such a complex issue. And we know that there are things that are highly improbable, but have a large impact. The pandemic was one example of that, right? I mean, this kind of zoonosis is always unexpected. It doesn't happen often, but when it happens, it can have a large impact. And that is one of the aspects that I think should enter some of these more ethical discussions, also with the citizens, right? Because it involves not only the health of the patient, but also the family around them, that they may have to be monitored, right? And also in a larger aspect, the whole society. So it's a matter of public health. That does not mean, let me just say, that should be a total no to it, because we take risks all the time in society with all kinds of technologies, right? And digitization of society and all of that involves such risks. However, it is important to have an informed acceptance of that. And I totally agree. It's not enough just to ask the opinions there are, but you have to sort of use mechanisms where the ethical aspects are explained and are transparent, where also the progress of the sciences, but also the uncertainties are, openly communicated. And I think unless we do that, we risk that we get a no from society, we get a no from politics for something that may be really important for many patients.
And I'm glad you've brought up COVID, because of course with COVID we saw that actually there's social media being overtaken with false views and inaccurate science over vaccination, and again that trust issue that you've talked about with the vaccine companies. Now, what can we learn from that, from COVID? And Stratos, did you want to add to what has been said already?
Well, indeed, with COVID, I mean, we were fighting two epidemics, one health crisis and one infodemic, and I think the worst part was the other one, the second. And we might face similar issues. There's a lot of society has changed, the way we communicate has changed, and there might be conspiracy theories, fake news. There's a lot that we have to prepare ourselves on how to address. I think the baseline is that we need to find a solution. Currently, we have 10 to 15% coverage of the global needs with the traditional transplantation. And even worse, a lot of areas in the world, regions, have zero access to transplantation. Yes. On the other side, those areas have zero because they have not invested in transplantation. There is no interest, so there will be no interest even in xeno, perhaps. Of course, what happens to those people is something also part of an ethical debate. How we address that? I think we need to embrace the technology. We need to embrace the innovation and the potential, but we need also to find the solutions to address the concerns.
So, I mean, to put it bluntly, are you saying that all the money that's invested in very new, and not new, but it could be actually better spent in providing more basic transplants, if there is such a thing, to a wider number of people throughout the world?
Well, we strive, and we've seen a lot of, I think we have to work in parallel, because we said 2024, that will be the breakthrough, the scientific breakthrough, but how long will it take to actually translate into having that therapy at the bedside? It will take many, many years in order to make it available. So how do we deal with the gaps and the needs in between? I don't know. I mean, as I said, we waited 20 years to get here. Yeah. How long, again, Eckhard, how long will it take to actually have a mass diffusion of that therapy? And of course, in the meantime, other technologies will be developed. They will be competing also to that. We've seen a lot here. So public perception will change. Yeah. It's not something standardized.
Penilla, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I was thinking, listening to Stratos and the others here, that, I mean, there are still many countries in the world who have not the possibility to transplant people for all organs. So we have quite a lot to do, in all countries to really make it more equal or having some kind of equity for patients. So, I mean, we could also do things in parallel. We shouldn't just be stuck to one or just a few things. We need to do it maybe all at the same time to really create the possibilities for patients in need. And that's really what I'm thinking about a lot when I also have been involved in ESOT's work with registries now. It's so obvious to me, at least, that we do have opportunities, but they are not taken care of. Yeah. And maybe we also should go out and be more proactive to governments and parliaments and really say that you need to provide this for your patients. It's not about, doing something very special for some people, because anyone can really, end up in a situation where you need a transplant.
I think Matthias wants to come in, and then I want to come back to
I just want to support this a little bit. I think the issue of justice is one of the main ethical issues that we are facing here, and particularly also the justice between the rich north and the global south, right? And we have seen these also in the pandemic, the same way, distribution of vaccines and all of that. So this is an important issue. But also when we look inside our own societies, and I agree with Eckhard that there is no unique position that you can assign to a certain religion or so on. There is actually a multitude of social identities. Democracies are characterized by a diversity of values, right? And the worst thing a government knows is splitting up social cohesion. We need them somehow together. We need them, solidarity in our societies, and particularly in health issues. So I think there is an issue that from a governmental perspective is really very important. And it concerns values and ethics, right?
Lots of points here to bring up, but Eckhard, first of all to you, this situation of equity and about people in the global south. I mean, can you conceive of a world, you're doing it, I think, how many organs do you think you can produce from pigs at any, in any one time? How quickly could they be produced? Are we talking about off the shelf? How could they be used in emergency situations? And will they eventually, is it your goal, not just to supply Germany, not just to supply Europe, but also further afield?
For me, this is at the moment not the most important question. I would like to see a successful clinical pilot study, and pig breeding can be upscaled a lot. In Germany, for instance, we are producing 50 million pigs per year, of course, under conventional conditions. But when I look at the current waiting list for hearts in Greater Europe, the number is about 5,000 or 6,000, which is a very small proportion of the 50 million. And I think the production of the organs, also off-the-shelf production of the organs, this could be managed. This is not our problem at the moment. Upscaling will be possible. What we need to see, and I come back to the trust, and in my view, trust is only being built by good and solid data. These are reliable, good clinical pilot studies that demonstrate that xenotransplantation can work. And I think this is the key for all future aspects of the discussion.
So you say that's what you want to concentrate on, but we are talking about challenges and how they're going to be overcome. What do you see as the biggest challenges at the moment for Xeno in terms of society and ethics?
I think it's a very important point to create awareness and knowledge about xenotransplantation in the general public. But I think the important point is, fortunately, the proportion of the population that is in need of an organ is a relatively small proportion. And of course, these are the people who are most interested in the topic. I think it will be extremely difficult to create the same level of information over the whole population. And therefore, my very personal opinion is the healthy people should not decide whether this option might be available for people who are in need of it.
Thank you. Jayme, the issue of trust came up, and obviously you're an extremely ethical scientist, and as you say, you're doing it for all the right reasons. But when people are talking to you about risk, and Matthias talked about stenosis, what do you say to people about the risk profile of an allograft compared with a potential xenotransplant?
I will, if I'm talking about zoonoses, what I can definitively tell someone is that at 7 days, I can tell you that there was no transmission of a zoonosis after a kidney transplant. That's what we know in a human. That's all I know right now. But I try to put it in context. So in human-to-human allotransplantation, for example, we routinely take organs from hepatitis C positive individuals. We put those into hepatitis C negative patients. And we know uniformly within 3 days, they are going to seroconvert, meaning I'm going to take a hepatitis C negative recipient and they are going to become hepatitis C positive. We're then going to give them direct-acting antivirals, and between 8 and 12 weeks, they're going to convert back to seronegative. But during that time frame, of course, we are trusting them to go back to their home, to their community, to practice safe practices in terms of their interactions because they are actively viremic. And certainly, in some small way, they do sort of, pose a potential community risk, right? So that's the reason why emergency rooms have screenings for hepatitis C. Similarly, in the HIV positive to positive, part of the reason in the US that has been done under the umbrella of research is that even though we are putting those organs into HIV positive individuals who are not actively viremic, there's a lot that we didn't know. Are we going to somehow create a multi-drug resistant virus that could then cause more trouble? And so my point is that this is not unique. We've been tackling this within our field for a very long time. I think the public has been a great partner in all of this. I think our patients have been great partners in all of this. And I think that we can get through all of this and do this in a reasonable and a safe way. But I think it's important to put all of that in context when you're talking to the public, to the patients, et cetera. But if you're asking me how would I consent my patient about a zoonotic risk, I would say all I can tell you is that at 7 days, we have not seen a disease transmission. And in fact, as a part of a phase 1 clinical trial, you are enrolling in this to help us understand if in fact we're going to see a disease transmission, because a phase 1 clinical trial is for safety, all right? And so that's actually what it's, safety and feasibility, that's all that is. And so I think that's really important that you communicate that to the patient. In fact, a phase 1 trial is not even designed to look at efficacy in most cases. So whether or not it works for the long term is not necessarily even a primary outcome, right? A primary outcome is, do you have a disease transmission, whether the graft works or fails?
So to put it a little bit bluntly then, are you saying that your gut instinct is that in many respects, xenotransplantation could be safer for individuals than certain types of allografts?
I will tell you that I know more about the disease state of the pigs that I have transplanted into human decedents than I ever know about a human kidney or a human liver that I routinely use in human-to-human allotransplantation. I would defer to my colleague on the heart side of things, but I can tell you, there are many things that you don't know or that you find out after the transplant has already occurred because the time frame for deceased donation is so short. And so we're constantly asking our patients to take risks. But these pigs are in the most, it's unreal. The facility is extraordinary, and we literally know more about those pigs than we do about most human donors.
That's a very, very strong message, Jayme. How do you think that message could be got across in a simple way to both, as you say, Eckhard, the people who are potentially on waiting lists, but also the broader public, to make them realize that actually this is safer than you think? It's
a great question. I'm not sure I have the best answer. I worry a little bit. Sometimes my sort of black and white view of that, what I don't want to do is discourage people from accepting a human transplant by somehow suggesting that they're dirty or not good enough. So I don't know. I would defer to some of my other colleagues who might have better ideas on how best to disseminate that.
Eckhard?
Well, you know the source pig through the whole lifetime, basically. You can screen it as often as you want. You can even do a whole genome sequencing to discover viruses that are not even known yet, yeah? And this is absolutely impossible currently with human donors. And therefore, I have the same opinion that in terms of infectious risks, a xenotransplant, if everything is done properly and the animals are maintained under strict DPF conditions, must be safer than a human transplant.
Penilla, is that a message you think you could persuade the Scandinavian or the Swedish public with?
Well, I would say that trust is not always about facts or statistics. I'm sorry, Jacqui. But I think trust is also about how you feel about things. And you can see that from social media, of course, because you can select everything nowadays to what you like or not. You can select only things that you agree with. And if you don't, you don't have to take part of that. And I think that's the most dangerous thing to have a democratic discussion in society, really. That you need to have, for having a discussion, you need to have both sides or several angles of a topic. And so to really have a discussion, you need to have someone that start the discussion with some really good, I can't pronounce it, but to light a sparkle in a way. Yeah.
So a multi-pronged approach, both emotional and with facts and figures.
Yes.
Has to be a joint approach.
Yeah, and I've been too long in politics to really realize that that's the fact. Because when sometimes you present facts and people are not, boring, uninteresting, and so on, and then you have someone who is really, pushy and very charismatic, and suddenly you have the issue on the table.
So you're saying we need almost an ambassador for Xeno, like a personal ambassador who could really get that emotional side across. Let me come to Strato. What are your thoughts on what's been said about this combination of feeling, and that sometimes it's feeling that takes against Xeno?
Well, I think if we go a few decades ago, when human transplantation started, there were similar feelings, I suppose, at the time. It took a lot of years to convince. I would recall Chris Barnard in South Africa having been highly criticized about what he did. And it's not always accepted, and there are these feelings, of course, and we have to deal. But I think also trying to revert the social media. We've talked about the negative aspects of social media, but I think they are a powerful tool that will also make that giant leap and help us also share those feelings and perhaps even promote even faster the integration and acceptance of the anything new.
Let me move on to a slightly different topic now, allocation of organs. So we've got there, let's speculate that it's regulators have approved it. How, Jayme, will you decide who gets these organs?
It's a great question, particularly for a country that doesn't have universal health care. I think where we are in the United States are going to have to learn is in the context of kidney transplantation. It's really the only sort of platform where we have universal health care. So when you develop kidney failure, you qualify for Medicare independent of your age. And so I think we will likely use the framework that we've used for human allo transplantation in terms of how we do this, which of course has its own inequities that we continually are addressing and refining, but I think that's probably a reasonable first start. I think it's a much broader issue when you start thinking about other organs, but it's no different than it is in the context of allo transplantation.
Eckhard, did you want to comment on that?
That's not really my field, but I would
sure
say
you've got a view.
from a very simple view is if we have more organs, the distribution should be easier than with fewer organs. And the main goal of xenotransplantation is to provide those patients with a solution for whom currently a human organ is not available.
I think the issue, though, just becomes, I think what we don't know, at least in the context of kidney, is whether or not it's going to be a bridge or destination. So when you start thinking about allocation, is a human kidney better than a xenograft? You know, we already know, for example, living donor kidneys are better than deceased donor kidneys. Where does xeno fit into that? And, you know, how do you then create equity? I think that will be a complicated mix, but that's going to take time to understand what xenografts are capable of. But it'll be certainly something that we have to take into account, similar to extended criteria kidneys that require special consent form and are sort of a separate list within the larger list. I don't know if xeno is going to be as good. The one I put in worked way better than any other kidney I've ever done, 37 liters a year, and that's pretty good. But I don't know how long will that last, but those are things we'll have to look at.
Okay, thank you. Stratos, you've been in this world for a long time. If you have a view on allocation, how could it be done?
We use allocation for two reasons, actually. One is for because human organs are so rare and we have such a wide demand, so we need to put some rules on who gets it and how to prioritize. So this is one aspect. The other one is about the scientific and making it a better match and to work better and to have a proper outcome. So I think the criteria, as Eckhard said, and I'll agree, if you have an abundance of organs, you don't need to allocate them. We have similar examples with tissues, let's say, where you have, and let me just mention that xeno exists in tissues even before. We've been using heart valves from animals for many, many years, so there hasn't been a problem, of course. It's a different aspect. But then the availability, I think, and the mass production of the organs will actually diminish the need for allocation unless, of course, we look into the access, which will be the other issue, in terms of cost, in terms of coverage, health systems that we'll be providing. And therefore, this might be another aspect of allocation that we need to consider of who gets what in terms of social, financial capacity.
Matthias, did you want to come in on that? And also, I mean, obviously, Stratos mentioned earlier about the risk of medical tourism, of people coming from countries where they have lots of money to another country where xeno is available. Talk us through that.
Well, medical tourism is obviously a threat to all the idea of public health care, right? Because it typically privileges a certain group, financially strong and everything, in relation to the others. Also, it is a feeling that within your country, you don't have the proper regulations that take care of the healthcare and others of your own people, right? And so definitely one has to try to minimize that. How that can be done in this very fragmented world nowadays, I have no idea at all, right? I think it must be very difficult. We see it in other areas already, but on the other hand, I don't think this will be the major hurdle for xenotransplantation. It will be one aspect to consider, but I don't think that's where it will be the crucial, point.
And you mentioned regulation, and we haven't spoken much about regulation, where we've talked about how there may need to be new legislation and regulation, and different regulators having different appetites for this. But, what regulation, what might it need to look like if Xeno was successful? Yes, Matthias.
Well, I think any regulation that is rather explicit is always helpful, right? Because we don't want regulation that, is vague and leaves things to individual judgment. So in a way, I think we need a regulation that covers both the supply and the provision of, organs, be they from allo transplantation or from xenotransplantation. But also, in this case, I think we need a regulation that covers, for example, the duties or the constraints of family members, to be monitored maybe for a certain time, for possible infections, all those close relationships. And that restricts, of course, their freedom. And that should be a rather strong regulation. I mean, we don't want people to just, get a hurt and then disappear, right? We want to follow up. And that is also part of the trust building.
Yeah. And talking about follow-up, I wanted to ask Jayme this earlier on. In terms of a clinical trial to prove and show that this was safe and effective, I mean, how long would we need to follow up a patient? It wouldn't be like a normal drug, do it for a couple of years, 3-4 years. How long would you need? And this is a completely different type of clinical trial, presumably.
I mean, as the researcher in me would like to follow the person for their lifetime. I think that's going to be really important. And that's what I would recommend doing. That's what I would certainly counsel the patients that we would do. If you put it in the context of known disease transmission, so for example, if we go back to the hepatitis C example that I gave, or excuse me, not the hepatitis C per se, but if we're using a high infectious risk donor. So they used injection drugs within 7 days of deceased donation, which means our nucleic acid testing is not perfect. So we cannot tell you whether they truly did or didn't have HIV or Hep C. Those patients get laboratory values at 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days. And if they don't seroconvert at 90 days, we presume they're not going to get it from that organ, and we move on. I don't think we know. I think if you asked me, I would say that if a xenograft recipient did not seroconvert after that 90 days, and you've done as Eckhard had suggested, and you have followed appropriate standards, and that animal came from a pathogen-free facility, and you tested the product and knew it didn't have anything when you transplanted it, I think if they don't seroconvert at 90 days, they're not going to. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't still follow them in these early phases, because I think we need that data to build trust and really let the community know that we've done this in a safe and efficacious way.
Thank you. Strategy, we've heard what Matthias has said about the regulation. When you're going to go back to the WHO, what are you going to be telling them about what you've heard here? Are you going to be giving them a little bit of a kick, saying, look, actually, this is really happening now. We need to do something. We need to update our guidelines. We need to tell, member governments they need to get their regulation in gear.
As I said, we already talked about regulation in 2004. And we had said
a long time ago.
What are the needs for regulation. It's specific things that you need to take into consideration. Quality, safety, so this is manufacturing standards, good manufacturing product, GMP standards that you have in every lab in the industry. The other thing is the oversight. So you need to have the proper authorities, you need to have investigative inspection capacity in order to enforce the regulation. We will not go into the clinical standards of the practice, because then it will become more complicated. You don't put that in the law, but then you need to have that in conjunction with the professional society and the clinicians in order to set up that basic safety network for the patients and the trust. So, as WHO, we are monitoring close the development of the project, of the innovation and the science. We have a science division actually at WHO that has done a horizon scanning. It's not just Xeno. We have identified about 100 new innovations in healthcare that we need to keep an eye on, and we're trying to stay ahead of the curve. And we will be producing some sort of, at least for the time being, we cooperate with the associations, with the International Xenotransplant Association, with ESOT, with the Transplantation Society. So we need to have that engagement, and also on the other side will be the governments, the politicians, the policymakers, that we will need to also bring them on board.
Just quickly, you say that there are 100 new exciting things that the WHO are looking at. Xeno in the top 5, top 10?
AI.
Okay, now look, we've almost come to the end of our evening. I just want to ask each of our panelists in 30 seconds, that's the rule, 30 seconds, just to tell me what are the next steps that you see are vital in getting Xeno accepted and happening, if you think that is what should be done. And I will start with Penilla and we'll go this way. So Penilla, what are the next steps?
We started today with a seminar about health democracy, and we agreed that information about transplantation is quite hard and has got bad knowledge, within the public. And I think this is the tricky one. It's a step further here with the information, but start with the patient organizations.
Okay.
They are the average people, you and me.
Right, Penilla, you are not average, I can tell you that for certain, but thank you for that contribution. Matthias, what are the next steps?
Well, first of all, I must say I'm an easy one to convince about the progress that is made because I generally believe in science. But on the other hand, I also know that many people don't, right? And I also would like to stress what Penilla said earlier, the factor of fear. The feeling of fear is a real thing. And in many ways, it's also rational. And we have to just, respect that. So my appeal is really for a society like this, for specialists like you, to open up for more dialogue. I know that you already do this a lot, but I hope you can gather other people involved and open a dialogue with different groups like patient groups or other civil society members, which is a dialogue also including the unknowns and everything. I think that is the most important hurdle for a broad success of xenotransplantation.
Thank you, Matthias. Stratos.
More resources support the science and the technology to develop faster. Like we've seen with the COVID, the vaccines, the rapidness of the development of the vaccine. I think we need more clinics to engage in the research and, of course, in the application. And on the same side, I agree, build the networks, the platforms for the communication with the society in order to speed up also the acceptance.
Thank you. Stratos. Eckhard.
I'm repeating myself. I think the most important thing would be a successful, transparent pilot trial with a few patients. I think the comparison with COVID is not absolutely fair, because the number of patients who needed a vaccine immediately was, of course, by orders of magnitude higher than the patients that need an organ. What we did in terms of communication, so in Germany, the only site where xenotransplantation research is going on is Munich. But earlier this year, we invited all clinics for cardiac surgery from Germany, and they all agreed, if you are ready for a pilot trial, we help you to recruit the patients. Yeah?
Thank you. And Jayme, a last word from you.
Yeah, I think I would just say two things. One is I think we need better collaboration across groups. I think I love a healthy competition, but I think it's really not as important who is going to be first to get into the clinic as it is that we get it right. And I think I would love to see the groups involved have better collaboration and dissemination of information so that we're not sitting in plenary sessions learning things for the first time. And then the second piece is I echo that I think engaging the patients and the community. I think it's really going to be their push that helps it get into the clinic and helps regulators say, you know what, this is important. We do need to do this. So those would be my two asks.
Well, look, it's been a fantastic panel, a fantastic discussion. I think that there's one place where we can engage patients and patient organisations, and we can engage scientists at whatever stage in their career and clinicians and surgeons. It's here at ESOT where people can be inspired to get engaged, to get the message across, and to maybe start doing some of the kind of research that you are doing so brilliantly. So I have to say thank you very much indeed to the panel for all your great contributions, and thank you to ESOT for organising this great event. And I hope it's given you some food for thought, and who knows, let's keep tabs. 2024, that might be the year for Xeno. Thank you.